And with no further ado, Norma, our founding president.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for being with us today. I'm Norma Levy. I'm the president of New Plaza Cinema. We're a nonprofit independent cinema. Today, we'll be discussing Network, a 1976 satirical drama written by Paddy Chayefsky and directed by Sidney Lumet. And so now I am pleased to turn this over to our host for the day, the curator, Gary Palmucci. Gary?
Thank you, Norma. Hi, everyone. Once again, I'm coming to you from, I guess we call it the White Room here at New Plaza Cinema at Macaulay Honors College. One of my favorite things about doing these Zoomcasts has been revisiting films that I haven't seen often since their original release. As Laurie said, in today's case, Network from way back in 1976, my senior year in college, and seeing how well they hold up or don't, and what they might have to say to first-time viewers in 2023. Now, a Network, director Sidney Lumet and screenwriter Paddy Chayefsky took a big bite out of the hand that once fed them live and early broadcast TV in this scorching satirical drama set in the mid-70s high watermark of American network news and entertainment and the often decidedly unholy, even obscene overlap between the two, with at least 3 heroic performances by Peter Finch, William Holden, Faye Dunaway, the first 2 of them the first and third, Finch and Dunaway, Oscar winners. Now, Max, what struck me this week, just over the horizon of everything stewing about a Network, was this tsunami of changes that was coming when Network appeared in American cinemas. The 24-hour news circle birthed by CNN, the VHS and beta recorders, HBO, Showtime and their brethren, MTV, the home computer, perhaps in some ways dwarfing the 70s hegemony of the 3 big networks. Now, does our original trailer telegraph any of that?
The original trailer is doing a lot of its focus on the, I guess, the first act of the film, where it's clear that this network anchor, Howard Beale, played by Oscar winner Peter Finch, is pretty unhinged. And this is absolutely the original trailer. I remember it vividly, seeing it on the big screen when it was finally working its way to the smaller towns in early 1977. So let's take a look at the original trailer for Sidney Lumet's Network.
And now, the distinguished television news commentator, Mr. Howard Beale.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like at this moment to announce that I will be retiring from this program in 2 weeks' time because of poor ratings. Since this show was the only thing I had going for me in my life, I have decided to kill myself. I'm going to blow my brains out right on this program a week from today.
What the hell's going on?
Prepare yourself for a perfectly outrageous motion picture.
Howard Beale went up there last night and said what every American feels, that he's tired of all the bull.
Sakes, Diana, we're talking about putting a manifestly irresponsible man on national television.
I am not putting Howard back on the air.
It's not your show anymore, Max. It's mine.
I got a feeling I'm being made.
You are.
Got to warn you, I don't do anything on my first date.
We'll see. I want a show developed based on the activities of a terrorist group.
Well, Ahmed, I'm gonna make a TV star out of you. Just like Archie Bunker.
That's the #1 show in television!
We're number one! There is no America. There is no democracy. There is only IBM and DuPont and Exxon. And you have meddled with the primal forces of nature. And you will atone. Am I getting through to you, Mr. Beale?
Why me?
Because you're on television, dummy.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Network News Hour with Howard Beale.
I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not gonna take this anymore! Things have got to change."
How many
but first,
stations does this
you've
go out
got to
live
get
to?
mad.
67.
You've got to say... I want you to get up right now. Go to your windows, stick your head out, and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not gonna take this anymore!"
Are they yelling in Atlanta, Herb?
Are they yelling in Atlanta, Ted?
I'm mad as hell! I'm not gonna take it anymore!
Network by Patty Chayefsky, directed by Sidney Lumet, produced by Howard Gottfried. Television will never be the same.
The original trailer.
Everything but the kitchen sink, and including the bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken in there.
Yes, and I was talking about this the other day when I was discussing for New Plaza Cinema. I'm Max Alvarez, by the way, in case anybody doesn't know. When I was discussing TV news as portrayed in film and television, how network was a bit of a shocker for American audiences in the late 70s before all these changes Gary was talking about, because you had very strict standards and practices at the networks. So you didn't have profanity from a news anchor. That was unthinkable, because this was free television and you couldn't have all this uncontrolled ranting and raving going on live to affiliates. And so you're watching network in 1976, 77, and it's fascinating to see how network television would be if it didn't have these censorship restrictions. That's the one thing that stands out. Because today we might say, well, what was the big deal about Howard Beale in this age of cable and the internet? But it was a big deal.
Well, plenty of guys like him got their own programs on, so-called news shows and other things that came into being in the decades ahead.
Because when we think about it, Patty Chayefsky's script, it anticipates a number of significant changes. It anticipates the internet era, self-produced media. I mean, you have that radical left-wing group filming its own bank robbery. I mean, how different is that from people taking selfies and recording things with their smartphones and posting them?
For sure.
A 1970s version of YouTube security videos. He of course anticipates so-called reality TV that came of age, the 90s, the 2000s, on cable TV with non-professionals having series built around them, networks exploiting amateur celebrities, and also the transformation of what we would consider hard news into infotainment, and of course, newscasts in which shouting and screaming matches of hysteria become commonplace in so-called public affairs shows, where when network came out, there was this old-fashioned custom of letting people complete sentences on panel discussions, and that all started to change. So it also anticipates the domination of mass visual media by pundits and demagogues, all in the name of high ratings. So there's a lot that the film saw coming down the pike.
For sure. Well, that was really Sidney Lumet was on one of the great roles of 1970s directors at that point. He had, I think, in consecutive order, Serpico, Murder on the Orient Express, Dog Day Afternoon, and Network, all released, in sequence. And that was all big hits, award winners, and so forth. And I guess that was really kind of the peak of his I guess, I'm not sure what the word would be.
I know what you mean, because he is emerging during this new Hollywood era. I mean, he's been directing films in Hollywood since the late 50s, since he made that transition from, as you mentioned, live television. So he's riding the wave of that brief period of auteurist tendencies where the studios were trusting directors. I believe he even had final cut on a lot of his pictures at that time.
And he would never say, however, I think until very late in his career, a Sidney Lumet film or a film by Sidney Lumet. He felt very strongly about that it was, a real collaborative effort making a film, and he didn't like that possessory credit. Now, in the 80s, he made some other outstanding films, but they were not hits to the same level. Some of them are just very good. Some did well, some not so well at all. Prince of the City, The Verdict, Daniel, Running on Empty, those were good. And there were a bunch of clunkers mixed in there as well, unfortunately. But
because now by that time, the film industry is changing and it's moving into the blockbuster era. So it is getting more difficult for directors of adult content, adult-driven dramatic content like Lumet.
I remember he saw it coming in an interview when Prince of the City came out. He said, he's very concerned the picture had to do well, given what it cost and its 3-hour running time. And he says, and if we're going to continue making, directors are going to continue to have the clout to make these films. He said, if we don't gross it, we ain't going to get it. That was a
no, and that's
prophetic remark.
Absolutely, and Network. It's not a Sidney Lumet film, as you pointed out before we went on the air here. It's by Paddy Chayefsky, and that was very unusual for an industry that has such disdain for screenwriters to give that kind of recognition to the author.
Well, Chayefsky's previous film, The Hospital, I think had a similar possessory credit, not nearly as good a film, I don't think, as this. And then his subsequent film, many of us may remember, was a movie called Altered States, William Hurt's first starring role. And Chayefsky was so unhappy with the finished product that he put a pseudonym on, and he went to the other extreme. And a screenplay credit, Howard Aaron or something like that. Maybe
I think it was yes, it was Sidney Aaron was his pseudonym for Altered States. So he and Lumet are definitely venting in this film. There's a lot of rage and about television networks and the changing face of news. I can play the counterpoint in this point counterpoint discussion, where you have the introductory act, which sets the stage for Howard Beale's meltdown. We see a portrayal of TV news, but we don't really get much of a sense as to what makes this version of TV news so important. We are under the impression that the William Holden character is a dying brand of, or a dying breed of distinguished, reputable news producer. But we're not seeing evidence of that. I don't get enough of a sense as what made his character so important in news.
No, and in fact, at one point, Faye Dunaway sort of, calls him on it, saying, well, despite all your cries of integrity, your news broadcast included XYZ, trivial stuff last night. And she kind of puts him in his place at that moment.
Absolutely. And the action, as we recall, it starts in 1975, works into 76. You have to know so many of the political cultural references at the time. There's reference to Squeaky Fromme, for example, Patty Hearst. I didn't hear the name Sarah Jane Moore. I heard Sarah Jane something else, but that was a reference to one of the women who had made it.
On the advice of the legal department or something.
Possibly on President Ford's life. There are, of course, references to very highly rated television programs at the time. What is this? Is this a social satire, political satire? Is it a dark comedy, a melodrama, a midlife crisis drama? I guess it's a combination of all of those.
Absolutely.
And I guess and believe me, I am not defending networks at all. I mean, in full disclosure, spent a couple of years at ABC on the West Coast in the early 80s. So for me, what was a bit of an exaggeration, it made sense that Faye Dunaway's character wanted to come up with some really explosive, what we would now say reality TV shows. I wasn't buying into the Mao Zedong hour concept of centering a show around radical communist rebels, because where would the ad dollars come from? There's no way.
Well, of course, they were
advertisers-
having, and of course, they're having a big argument about that at some point, which is totally, ridiculous. That's the most cringeworthy portion of the film.
Yes, and it's a form of satire that I don't think works, because advertising is not mentioned really until the end, when we reach that final chapter where on Howard Beale is his demise, and where I think it's a really good scene where the executives are meeting privately to discuss killing him.
Let's kill the son of a bitch.
Right. And that's when they start discussing, I know ad dollars are discussed. And of course, at the very end, we see the quartet of images on the screen. And I know Dan Cale is going to discuss the look of Network, but we do see a commercial for Life cereal that was very popular, acknowledgement of advertising. But I think based on the programs she was wanting to produce, they wouldn't have rebounded financially from these choices, maybe
No.
ratings wise.
And the woman, the black woman producer of the show, who I guess is modeled after Angela Davis, though I don't recall any aspect of Angela Davis that would be parodied, could be parodied in that way in real life, but maybe I'm not remembering the whole thing. But
That was Marlene Warfield playing the character Lorene Hobbs. Yes, there seems to be sort of a crude effort there. The problem is, for me, is what is the film saying? I feel politically it's all over the place at times, because you said some cringeworthy elements with the radicals, which were portrayed in such an exaggerated fashion. There were academics, Arab academics, such as Jack Shaheen, who had written a book about stereotypes and offensive images of Arabs. And he cited Network very critically for that diatribe Howard Beale goes on, this anti-Arab diatribe, which contradicts a lot of the more radical messages the film seems to be advocating. So it kind of left, some of that leaves a bad taste, for me anyway. But you do have that very famous scene with Ned Beatty's Arthur Jensen, and Dan is going to talk more about how they filmed that, where he goes into quite a monologue about corporate influences in broadcast and the corporate world. Gary, I can't recall anything that specific being voiced in a Hollywood film before that time.
Well, maybe Putney Swope or something like that, but that's not a.
But
not
to
a
have
Hollywood
to
film.
have an MGM UA release where he's saying there is no America, there's no democracy, there's only IBM, ITT, ATT, and DuPont, Dow, Union Carbide, Exxon. That was very eye-opening for movie audiences in 1976.
Well, MGM at that point was in a real transitional period. They were just kind of a sidebar of United Artists at that point. Then they were making 3 or 4 pictures a year. So I guess they felt, and there was still some element of that going on in Hollywood. They felt they could take a few risks, I guess.
They were still enough of an independent entity to not have to kowtow to
And clearly Lumet could get whatever actors he wanted,
Yes, and I also can't think of another example. I'm sure they're out there, but Beatrice Straight won Best Supporting Actress, and she's only in one scene. That's quite
Well, yeah, maybe she's in 1.5 scenes, but that performance didn't hold up so well to me this time around.
Well, we can debate. I know there's going to be a big debate, and I expect our viewers will chime in as well. The acting in general is very high decibel and high octane. This is clearly a favorite of Sidney Lumet. He loves to have his actors really belted out there. Everyone seems to have their screaming scene. They're sometimes playing to the second balcony. When you compare some of the performances Faye Dunaway and Robert Duvall and Peter Finch were giving 2 years earlier, much more sedate. And here, of course, it's
somehow, and I remember I was very angry at the time when Peter Finch won the Oscar posthumously, of course, but I thought, of course, Robert De Niro for Taxi Driver should have got the Oscar that year. But now watching Peter Finch's performance, I don't know, somehow I was much more sympathetic to it. And I think he and Holden and Dunaway are playing, they're playing the material. They're not over the top. Duvall is like completely out of his mind, playing that executive and having a good time. But
and I believe his character, I'd heard one time that his character was inspired by the notorious CBS executive James Aubrey, who
Smiling Cobra.
The Smiling Cobra, who was known for let's just cater to the lowest common denominator in order to boost the ratings. I mean, for me, Beatrice Straight's performance improved this time than maybe my initial reaction. But she didn't do many.
I see that Kathleen agrees with you here on the.
Someone just, I think Kathleen pointed that out. And Beatrice Straight mostly had done television work. Peter Finch, many of us know, he died of a heart attack January 14th, 1977. So it was on the eve of the Academy Awards. I saw him on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson the night before he died. George Carlin was another guest.
Wow.
And George Carlin was going into a monologue about death. And I'll remember Carlin's joke was something like, he was addressing the audience. If any of you die, tell us what it's like, or tell us how it is. I'll never forget that. But
amazing.
But Finch was discussing his part, the Johnny Carson, and his, working with the American idioms and so on. And it was a sad, a terrible loss, of course. We can go on, and I'll do a quote before we get to Dan. My go-to place for contemporary views is usually in England, the Monthly Film Bulletin, and published by the British Film Institute. And the reviewer at the time said that Chayefsky sets up American television as a whipping boy for some general galloping dissatisfactions with modern life. Unfortunately, bad temper is a poor substitute for satirical precision, and Chayefsky's script is so convulsed with indignation that his scattershot assault is rarely on target. The Brits have a way of stating things.
Well, nonetheless, he won the Oscar, and as you may recall, he got to come back the following year and excoriate Vanessa Redgrave after she accepted her Oscar for Julia. And he got up and said, I better say something. I'm not going to be able to sleep with me tonight. I'm sick and tired of people using the Academy Awards for the propagation of their own personal political propaganda.
Of course, by doing so, he was also propagating political views himself. But yes, that was the following year. Well, we have so much more to discuss about Network. Let's now hear from our cinematography and filmmaking specialist. Dan.
Well, and Dan, if I have to bow out before you're finished, please excuse me, but I know we're being recorded.
Well, you're coming back in towards the end, I hope.
We shall see.
Good. Okay.
Thank you, Dan Cahill.
Yes. Hello. Glad to be here. Had a little connectivity problem earlier, but I think I'm all set. I'm just going to add in my slides for Network. And I think we should be on full view at this point. So Network. This is a remarkably visual film. And okay, I don't know why I'm not advancing. Oops. Here we go. Sorry. Okay. This is the opening shot of the movie, which declares itself to be a New York City movie. We can tell from the Radio City sign that this is 6th Avenue, or Avenue of the Americas, as we will no longer refer to it in this program. Here is the credit that I am going to salute. Owen Roizman was a very accomplished cinematographer. It's appropriate to salute him because he passed away this past January, 3 months ago. Here he is on the left with Sidney Lumet, and he was a New York cameraman, born in Brooklyn, and I'll just name 5 films of his that won Oscar nominations. He never won the actual award, The French Connection, which, by the way, was his first film that was ever released. That's not a bad way to start. The Exorcist, Network, Tootsie, and Wyatt Earp. So he had a lot of interesting credits. This man, I'm going to slip in Paddy Chayefsky's image here because the way this is photographed, he's holding a slate for the film. And everybody talks about the fact that he was on set all the time. And he contributed a lot to how it looked. And Owen Roisman, in an interview that I saw, said that Chayefsky had numerous and detailed descriptions of the visuals for each scene, and that he, Roisman, tried to take very seriously as he was doing the film. So here is kind of an archetypal shot from the movie. A lot of the scenes take place in offices, real locations, by the way. When I first watched this again last week, I thought, damn, that looks real. But wait, this is an MGM film. They would have taken it to Hollywood and used fake backdrops, but not the case with a New York-centric director and DP. Those are real live backgrounds. Here's what's interesting is that this is one of the rare shots where direct sunlight is streaming in. You can see it hitting the floor and the walls. This is a very dicey way to shoot, because sunlight is going to move. Within a matter of a couple of minutes, it's going to be in a different place. In fact, shooting films like this means that you are constantly dealing with weather. So you almost might be shooting an exterior scene. This is the location for all of that. It is a building owned by MGM at 1350 6th Avenue, which is at 55th Street. And MGM just happened to have 3 floors empty. So the production moved in and pretty much could do whatever they wanted to. So let's look at some of the dynamics of shooting with a live background like this. Here we see Diana in her office. It's a bright sunny day, and you can tell that the backgrounds are overexposed. And part of the challenge is that the DP is trying to light the inside to match with an appropriate difference between the inside and the outside. This one works pretty well. By the way, the gentleman on the right with the beard is an actor named Daryl Hickman, who began as a child actor, not to be confused with his brother Dwayne Hickman, who went on to become Dobie Gillis on a TV sitcom in the 50s. Here is another shot in the same room, and notice what happens. The bright stuff that we saw in the background is still pretty bright, but we're now exposing for the building directly to the right of Ms. Dunaway, which is in shade. And this is also a tricky thing. Where do you expose it? I think he got it right here, but there are a lot of variables that come into play. Here, by contrast, is a cloudy day with Diana in her office. And you can see how the background is a lot clearer, sharper, a lot more detail. It's not overexposed. This may be what they were aiming for, but you can't always shoot with the weather you want. You have to deal with the weather that's out there. This is a lovely scene. This is inside Frank's office, and we have the view shooting down 6th Avenue. And here they are underscoring it with the sort of power shot of Robert Duvall staring down the avenue that he thinks he owns. Here we have Faye Dunaway, and here is an interesting sidelight of shooting indoor and outdoor. It's something called color temperature, and it's measured in degrees Kelvin. I won't go into specific details, but you know from your video cameras, there's a button that says white balance on it, and if you ever use that, it would set the color temperature for the recording you're going to make. And usually you want to point that at a piece of white something, paper or a wall, and press the button. And whatever the dominant light source is that's lighting that white object will be how the camera is balanced. So here, very clearly, he has balanced the camera for incandescent light, which is the interior light, which makes the exterior light, daylight, look a little blue. Now, you can correct for this. You can put gels over the windows. There's a lot of things you can do, but sometimes it's nice just to let it go blue. Here, this kind of sets the mood for a scene. And it says that it's kind of dark and gloomy out there. It's still daylight, but it's rough weather. Here is a scene that works very well in terms of the indoor-outdoor balance. This is in the dining room, simply another exposure, not looking down 6th Avenue anymore, I don't think. And here is one example. This is the gentleman, I think his character was named Ruddy, who died during the course of the story. And this is his last scene. And they were clearly exposing for him and just letting the outdoors go way overexposed. You have a hard time reading much detail at all in that. And this could be just an example of being under pressure, not having the time to put darkening gels over the windows or to illuminate his face a little more brightly. It's a great shot of him. I think the exposure on him is lovely. And you sometimes have to make compromises to get that sort of thing to work. Here is one also that works very well. You can see there's direct sunlight coming in. It's hitting the cardboard box on the right side of the frame. And we get a nice view of Manhattan, corporate Manhattan. Here is the opposite extreme. This is Max Schumacher in a screening room with very, very dim light, which is kind of what you would expect in a screening room. And now we have to think for a minute about shooting these scenes at night. Now, you will notice, obviously, that you want to get the lights of the neighboring buildings in the shot. But here's what also creeps in. You see to the top right of the frame, reflections of the overhead fluorescent lights that are illuminating the room. By the way, just a sidebar, the guy on the left of the frame looks a lot like Gene Siskel to me, phoning in his report to Roger. I don't think it is, but there is strong resemblance there. So oftentimes with fluorescent fixtures, a cameraman will replace those tubes with tubes of his own device that may be brighter, might be balanced for outdoor light. But here you had to sort of let them be in there. They were probably helping the indoor exposure. This is another night scene in Max's office. We remember this scene. And I remember Roisman talking about how with a scene this dark, you find yourself planting little lights here and there around the room to create the effects you need. Clearly, the desk lamp is doing a lot of work here, but there is also a light above and behind Dunaway, which is hitting her head and back, and it's reaching far enough across the desk to show Holden's face. This location is a ballroom at the Plaza Hotel, and we see no evidence of additional lights. It is possible that they replaced the lights within the chandeliers and fixtures with brighter ones, or maybe they just went with a very low exposure on this, but it looks very natural, very real, which is the goal. This room is kind of a spectacular place. In reality, it is the boardroom at the New York Public Library, and I'm speaking of the
Dan, you froze up.
Yes. Oh, I hope Dan can unfreeze, because this is such a fantastic discussion about the look of Network.
Right? Let me text.
So I will try to vamp a bit while Dan.
Iconic building at 5th Avenue and 42nd Street.
There he is. Okay, Dan, please continue.
I'm back. Yep.
We last heard you when you were describing this as the boardroom for the New York Public Library. Please continue.
And Roisman reported that he had one limitation, and this often happens in an important location. You're not allowed to do certain things. And the rule in here was that he could only set up one light on a stand. So here we are. This is the bulk of the scene starts this way, and you can see that Ned Beatty at the far end is hit by a spotlight. And here is sort of a closer view. The rest is darkness, except for the banker lights on the table, which look gorgeous. Now, I have to say here, there is an element, Max and Gary spoke about it, of Mr. Lumet over-directing his actors to give him the full bellow effect. Well, here is a still shot of Sidney Lumet clearly orchestrating Ned Beatty to go farther over the top than he probably would have preferred to. Here we have an artificial technique that many cinematographers will use. This is called a star filter. And you put it over, and if there is a point of light, it turns it into a star. And he did this knowing it was looking kind of unreal, but he thought it would sort of pep up this scene. This is one of the scenes that supposedly take place in Los Angeles, but it was filmed on Long Island. And that's some sort of Long Island Expressway in the background there. Here's another interesting effect. This is one of the I'm mad as hell shots of people leaning out their windows. And you will notice the blue lightning effect here. You don't really want to use lightning just as pure white light. You want to give it some emotional power, and the blue really helps. You can tell it's artificial when you look at the white light inside the building, lighting the white hair of the lady on the lower right. Boy, they must have been relieved to do something outside. This is outside the quote unquote terror group's building. It's shot at magic hour. You can tell that because most of the light is gone, but there's still some light in the sky, which helps. This is the scene of the conspirators, as I call it, when they're plotting to murder Mr. Beale. Both Sidney Lumet and Owen Roizman referred to this as looking like a Ford commercial. Now, I don't remember any Ford commercial that looked like this. Maybe someone can remind us. But what's interesting is that he created pools of light for each of the actors, and they were not allowed to move. So this is a very static scene. Lumet said he didn't move the camera much in this because he was quoting Chaplin that you don't want to move the camera when you're doing comedy. I'd never heard that, but this was his mantra. So he's got these people plotting to murder their anchorman. This is just another one of the lovely establishing shots that I seem to display. I love it when a scene is established looking through a doorway. It adds depth. You know this is a real apartment from the outside window view. And I want to put in a strong word for Beatrice Straight. Her acting has always worked for me in this scene. I know it was brief, but I think she earned her Oscar. And this guy, William Holden, as I was saying to Max the other day, for people of my generation, I was always comfortable with William Holden on the screen. I trusted him, I believed him, I liked him, as I do in this film. Now, I want to show you a couple of other shots of other actors. Some of you may remember the gentleman on the right with the loose necktie. That is Lane Smith, who played the banker opposite Sally Field's farmer woman in Places in the Heart, which we did about a month ago. And this one is the actress playing I'll just call her the Patty Hearst character in the terror group. She was a kidnapped heiress, and the actress playing this part, her name is Kathy Cronkite. And I will leave it to the rest of you to imagine who her father might have been and why she ended up in the film. So that concludes my presentation, gentlemen. I hope it worked for you. You're muted, Max.
Try that again. Dan, I got such a new appreciation for the look of Network from your analysis here. My memory was that the original film, as shown in the cinemas, and this was a problem with distributors with laboratories in the 1970s. I remember it not looking very attractive. The release prints, at least when they got to some of the outlying cities, were not very crisp. Certainly seeing it today in a more appropriately scanned high resolution copy, it gives, I think, more definition and is more faithful to what Lumet and Owen Roizman were after. That's my theory anyway.
Well, I can't remember what the release print looked like 47 years ago.
Come on, you can't? How can
I'm
you not
sorry. I know it's a great failure on my part. I'll try and do better next time.
No, but here's a bit of trivia, not so trivial actually. The end credits, they credit the camera operator as Fred Schuler, who, if memory serves, was the DP on Scorsese's The King of Comedy, if I'm not mistaken.
I think you are.
Which is the ultimate indictment of network television. So that's a fascinating transition there.
Well, operators often desired to move up to be directors of photography. It didn't always happen, but they clearly had to impress some people along the way, and that perhaps did it for Fred. I just want to say that my observations on all of the interior photography in these offices are based on literally 40 years of experience in my life shooting in these exact environments. I did a lot of work, video production for world-class law firms that always had offices that looked exactly like this. And I began looking at it and thinking, this looks really real. And damn if it wasn't real. I was so happy when I got to the interviews with people and they said, yeah, and it is a struggle. As I said a little earlier, in effect, you're making an exterior film because you're always watching where the sunlight is. Are the clouds coming in? Are the clouds going away? Would we lose the background? Yeah, if we just pulled the drapes and it was easier, but you want that background. So there is a lot of effort that goes into shooting this kind of material.
And it's also a challenge because when you're using a practical location, not something built in the studio, it limits where you can put the camera. Because if they could have reproduced the UBS offices on the West Coast, and they could have had movable walls and movable ceilings, and they could have put the camera anywhere. But when you're on a real location, that definitely makes it more and more of a challenge.
Well, one thing that's kind of clear to me is that they clearly chose the more spacious offices in that building, which tend to be, oh yeah, that's the cliche, the corner offices. So Holden's office and Dunaway's office, more so than Frank Hackett's office, clearly have two exposures that they're dealing with here. And that gives them much more room to situate the camera and crew and lights. So I think they managed, because they had the run of 3 floors in this building. I think they managed to do it rather efficiently.
And one thing I noticed in watching it the other night, and this is not uncommon at all, but there was a difference in the texture of the shots of William Holden and Faye Dunaway. Her close-ups were filtered. There was more of a gentler filter on her face to William Holden's. That stood out. I mean, I noticed that more this time. I didn't notice it before. That's not unusual.
They wanted him to look like a craggy, middle-aged man. So there you go.
Precisely. Another credit that's worth mentioning is Alan Heim, who was the film editor, putting all the footage together. In just a couple of very short years later, he will win an Academy Award for editing Bob Fosse's All That Jazz, and he will go on to other films as well.
Alan Heim was a very well-known and respected New York editor. Once again, very New York-centric here. They didn't want this to get out to California, and they kept it all in-house, so to speak.
And then, what are some other elements of network? I'm sure we will be opening this up very shortly to our audience. I would say that this clearly has an insider's feel to it. You can tell the director and the author knew a great deal about television. And didn't really regret having escaped from it. Although Chayefsky wavered between the two. He started out with live television, broke through with his screenplay for Marty in the mid-50s, There were other screenplays like The Bachelor Party and Middle of the Night. Then he's back in TV a little bit in the 60s. And then through The Hospital, that basically established his feature presence for
Well,
the duration.
Mr. Chayefsky won 3 Best Original Screenplay Oscars for Marty in the 50s and The Hospital in the earlier 70s and now Network. And it's worth pointing out a little advanced preview here. In June, we are going to be showing another film, perhaps my favorite Chayefsky screenplay, The Americanization of Emily, which I think works on so many levels that so many other scripts of his don't. And so I want you to mark your calendars for sometime in June. We'll let you know well ahead of time, but we're going to do that film.
That sounds terrific. And then Dan, not to put you on the spot, but you do have a lecture coming up for us on World War II films.
Yes, and I'm still working on narrowing that vast list of World War II films. I have a slant on it that I think will be a nice lead into The Americanization of Emily, but I'm still working on it and not quite ready to promote it. That will be coming in early June, sometime around the celebration of the anniversary of D-Day, which is depicted in The Americanization of Emily. So you have that to look forward to. I will be giving you the Wednesday afternoon lecture.
We definitely look forward to that. And before we open it up to questions, I'll just get one dig in that I have to get out of my system. I did pay good money to see the stage version of Network that was presented at the Belasco Theater between December 2018 and June 2019. I was riding a high from watching Bryan Cranston do a brilliant Dalton Trumbo, do a brilliant LBJ, and I couldn't wait to see him as Howard Beale.
Not to mention Walter White. Don't forget Walter White on TV.
Oh, that too.
Yeah.
But the Network, I can only speak for the portions that I watched on Broadway, because as soon as he was done with his "I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take this anymore" speech, we left. It was one of the worst pieces of theater I've ever witnessed. And I feel so much better sharing that with all of you. Now, let's, with Laurie's opinion, and I want to just quickly add, the problem with the Broadway production is that the material was rooted in the 1970s, but everything else had a 21st century look to it. The technology was 21st century, the fashions, and it just didn't make sense when they were referencing Nixon and all these other elements. So that's one thing I wanted to mention, because the film itself is very much set in the mid to late 70s.
It is very much of its time,
Absolutely.
including your reference to the anti-Arab slandering that's going on here. And when you think back, Arabs were sort of safe to slander in the 70s for American culture in general. And I deplore that, but I think it was just part of what they thought the popular opinion would bear.
Well, what I find troubling is there's this political blind spot with a lot of progressive left-leaning Hollywood people. Sidney Lumet, not a conservative man. Paddy Chayefsky, not a conservative man. Lumet especially very left of center.
Yeah.
But those two and Otto Preminger and other directors who were very progressive minded had this blind spot when it came to the Arab culture, and would depict them or make references to them in ways they would never consider doing to other ethnicities. And a lot of it has to do with the politics of Israel, and I get that, but it's unfortunate, and I think that's what causes some of these things not to weather well in certain elements.
And I would cringe at it because, as you all know, I spent 2 years living in an Arab country, Morocco, in the early 70s. And when I got back here and heard this stuff, I thought, what? Do they know what they're talking about? Chances are they didn't. They were just looking at guys in burnouses with turbans and thought, oh, those are the bad guys. But
yeah.
We're over
Because
that.
in the case of Network, when Beale is going on his rant and he's talking about economic control of the U.S. by Arab forces, it's just historically not accurate.
Yeah.
The countries that were heavily vested in the United States economy were not part of the seven OPEC countries. Those countries had a very small percentage, and a lot of these were European countries, France, Great Britain, and so on. So anyway, it contributes to the controversy of Network. But
Okay.
now, with Lori's assistance, we can turn to our attendees today to hear some of their thoughts and some of their questions.
I'm very eager to hear them.
Hi,
Same
everyone. If you go to your reaction button at the bottom of the screen and raise your hand, we'll call on you. I hadn't seen this movie since its original release, and I really enjoyed it. I found a lot of it prophetic, and I thought the scene where Robert Duvall says we should kill him, and there's just this long pause. It's like he's testing them. Like, would you guys really work me on this? Like there's a very uncomfortable long pause. And then of course, Faye Dunaway, the Empress of Gloom and Doom, way of capturing the audience. She just is like, but that was flawed for me, like the two guys and you see them and it's like,
well, wait a minute, we forgot to mention who one of those two guys were who shot Howard Beale. Well, no, but the white guy was Tim Robbins.
The assassin.
One of the assassins was Tim Robbins. Very young Tim Robbins.
I want to point out one other thing in the shot that I showed you of that conspirators meeting planning to kill Beale. Everybody has a light source on him except for the dark lady, Faye Dunaway, is mostly in shadow. All the others had a top light shining down on them, but somebody decided, no, she's the queen of evil here. Let's keep her in the dark.
And then I also wanted to ask you, did they have color temperature, multi, choices of filter of fluorescent in those days, or would they have used a minus green, pink gel? Because I've done interior office scenes where you have those ugly green fluorescents, and we just minus green. It's a lot cheaper and a lot faster, I'll tell you that.
Yeah. Again, you just hit the nail on the head. A lot of it had to depend upon speed and expense, which were often entwined. And
so everyone knows what we're talking about. Again, Dan mentioned color temperature earlier, and the old traditional fluorescent lights have a green color temperature to them. And if you take, that's why for women out there, if you have like redness, they tell you to put green over it as a concealer. Well,
the main point is to avoid shooting with green fluorescent lights as your source for anybody. And, what I would have done with the right equipment is just turn out the fluorescence and use my own incandescent light. It's much easier to balance for. But again, we don't know how much time they had to set up for each of these scenes, and we can only speculate, but the results look pretty good.
And Lumet was known for working very, very quickly. I believe he told an interviewer once that he shot Serpico in 23 days, some ridiculously short period. So he was a very, very fast worker. And you were talking about that scene where they're planning to kill Howard Beale. The actor who was playing one of the network executives who mentions we're talking about a capital offense here. That's Wesley Addy, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Who he has a memorable role in Robert Aldrich's Kiss Me Deadly.
Yes.
He's this caustic cop who is occasionally showing up at Mike Hammer's apartment and eventually alerts Mike Hammer to the bigger political implications of the case that Mike Hammer is involved with. I just wanted to give Wesley Addy.
I singled out Mr. Addy myself, and I kind of had to go, wait, who is that guy? I don't know his name. I know a lot of people like Daryl Hickman, but I knew the face. And What's really fun is going to IMDb to look at the filmography of someone like this who had scores of roles in movies we've seen. And if you see him in a still shot from that film, you go, oh yeah, him. That's a lot of fun.
It is.
At least. Maybe not for everybody.
Well, for some of us. Any other questions from our viewers?
Many
Disagreements, theories?
references to the film was in this single by Melbourne-based group Snog and the Naples Room. There is no America. I don't know what that is.
Oh, I think I may be able to jump in there. One of the many references by Melbourne Agit techno group Snog in the early 90s was, so they're mentioning a Melbourne-based Agit techno group called Snog, which is the UK slang for kiss.
Yes.
In the early 1990s, built around the "There is no America" speech. That's the speech given by Ned Beatty in that conference or that office.
I love that scene. I love how the, the window just, the thing comes down and blacks out the room. And I just love the way that whole scene played out, but that's me. IMO, in my opinion. Joshua, you don't have anything to say today?
Well, there is one of our regular participants is Kathleen Blanchard, who often signs in as KB, and she and I exchanged some emails in the last couple of days. She had just seen it, and the question she was posing is, what is William Holden doing with this nut job, Faye Dunaway? And, as I put it in a response to her, when you see Dunaway, you realize there's no there there. There is no fully developed human being there. Oh, there she is. Talk to us.
Hey, Kathleen.
Hi, everybody.
I'll
just
go ahead.
What were you going to say?
I was going to say, do I really have to explain the superficial nature of men? I mean, Faye Dunaway, she's gorgeous and sexy and crazy. What's the problem here from a male perspective?
I'm so glad you said that, Max, because I have a friend who was in a relationship with somebody, and it was interesting. She's going to kill me, but I won't attribute this.
We won't mention names. That's okay.
All right. AB from here on out.
She was dating a man that she believed she loved, and she was hoping desperately that he would love her back. And he would say, "I love your mind, I love your body, but I don't love you." And she couldn't understand that. Wow. And I almost think this is the same thing in this case, that, well, frankly, I think that William Holden's wife sort of pushed him into declaring his love for her, even though he was sort of skirting around it, right? I actually think that he was attracted to her for sure, because she represented excitement and vibrancy and, frankly, the television life that he had devoted his career to, right? And that was abruptly yanked from him. But I don't actually think he loved her, right? I think he actually loved his wife, and his wife, to me, stood for humanity, like the impact of what we do on real people, right? And it's interesting because I think the Faye Dunaway character sort of stood for, media's impact that nobody takes accountability for, right? That they just manipulate people, but don't really realize the impact they have on people's lives. But anyway, I do think he was.
Not to mention the fact that when they are in intimate scenes, sometimes making love, all she can chatter or yammer on about is TV. And he's just silent through the whole thing. And you kind of go, yeah, this is not going to last very long.
Are they actually together?
I don't know. Some of them were two shots. I don't know.
They're together. I remember Holden, this is when the film came out, he also was on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. And, Carson is always going for the leering questions. And he asked Holden about that scene with the two of them in bed together, and where Faye Dunaway is on top of Holden. And Holden, I remember his words were, "I couldn't look at her," because I guess he was afraid he was going to bust out laughing. So he tried not to look at her. And
That's super funny.
and I remember he said to Carson, "Wait a minute, you're not showing that scene now, are you?" And Carson said, "No, no, we can't show that scene." But he wants the Dunaway character to love him. But you do raise a good point, is that he probably doesn't really love the Dunaway character because his love is still with his wife there.
I think he's flattered that a young a younger woman would even look at him. That's my take on it. Again,
Sure.
is that male vanity.
That's part of the differential. And, females are subject to that if they can snare a younger man. It's not just
Well,
one way.
Or an
But
older,
also-
successful man with celebrity, right?
Sure.
No, that's true. But also she's representing this new generation, this television generation that he feels is missing the whole point of what makes the television news so important. So there's this generational divide, just there is now with people who grew up with the internet or who grew up with smartphones and so on.
Yeah.
So that's what she
It's a move.
represents. When he refers to
Yeah,
her
it's a
as-
move from
Go ahead.
3D to 2D. It's a move from 3D to 2D in real life to flat life, right? Yeah,
Very much so. And he-
I was, yeah.
referring to her as television incarnate and so on. But maybe his speeches to her, and there are a lot of speeches to her, what might have had a little bit more impact if we got more of a sense of what kind of a newsman he was, and a news producer, I should say, he was. But
Yeah, I was gonna say the other thing.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I was just going to reference what somebody else had written. This is another Australian reference. For many years, there has also been a popular current affairs satire show on ABC TV in Australia, anchored by local comedian Sean Micallef, I hope I'm getting that correct, called Mad as Hell. The opening credits clearly inspired by the film scene of people looking out of their windows and yelling mad. So this film has just had a tremendous amount of impact culturally ever since it came out.
Worldwide.
Worldwide.
Yeah, I was gonna say the other scene that really cracked me up was the one where the Liberation Army was negotiating the contract. They were flipping to page 22, section such and such, subsection such and such, and I just thought that was hilarious. So
That rubbed me the wrong. I thought that was a little over the top, but I know a lot of people it works for them, so I respect that.
Well, it was designed to make mockery of the whole situation.
The absurdity,
and
Because
Chayefsky is good
let's
at
be
that.
honest, I mean, there are people signing multi-million-dollar book deals and TV deals and movie deals who enter into this whole thing with a sense of ethics, and then they find themselves having to sell out the minute a contract is handed to them, and that scene captures that very effectively.
yeah, right. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Kathleen.
Take care, Kathleen.
Yeah, you definitely get the feeling that, Holden is just a dinosaur. He's, and I really think his wife knows that this is not anything, that this is just, because she says, I'm going to fight for you, but you never
Yeah.
really see her fight for him. And she fights for him, and probably the smartest way you can is to let him go do his thing and find out how stupid he is for doing it. That, you don't know what you got till it's gone, and
I
yeah.
suspect that there were more scenes between Holden and Strait than we saw in the final cut.
A lot of it ended up on the cutting room floor.
Indeed. So, there may have been scenes where we saw her making an effort, but, the point was made at the end of their first confrontation scene where she said, I'm going to fight to keep you, or something like that. And that pretty much told you everything you needed to know. You didn't need to see that dramatized because she said it so effectively.
Very, very well stated, Dan. Well, this has been a terrific discussion.
Can I ask a question?
Oh, yes, please.
Joshua.
My
Yes,
hand has been
Joshua.
up and nobody
Oh.
has.
Oh, don't take it personally.
Yeah, sorry.
no,
Please, Josh.
Nobody has acknowledged my hand is up.
Go ahead.
Not up.
Couple of things. First of all, you asked about the building on Long Island where you shot your picture. If I am correct, it was right near the LIE. It was part of the Huntington Quadrangle complex, which is very famous and looks exactly like the building you were talking about. As far as the Arab the prejudice, I think it may have less to do with there being Arabs and more to do. You remember when we all had to stand in line to get gasoline? It was the oil companies who were gumming things up, and the oil companies wanted us to blame the Arabs for it. So I think that may have been it. As far as Faye Dunaway is concerned, I just watched the Robert Redford movie about the agency where everyone was killed.
3 Days of the Condor.
Yes, and I thought she was probably more convincing in that than she was in Network. She just played a very strong woman. The other thing is,
One more thing, sorry, Joshua, I just wanted to put in my favorite remark about Dunaway's Oscar here, is that it was really a consolation prize for not winning for Chinatown 2 years earlier, which was, I think, her very best performance. But
it was, you may be right. She was excellent in that. And I remember when Chayefsky first started out with Marty, and then the Catered Affair, if you remember that.
Yes.
And I think his going to Network was sort of a shock, given the sort of Hamish things that you had in the past. And that's really all I have to say. I'm looking forward to the Americanization of Emily, which is one of my absolute favorite pictures. So I look forward to that.
Come back in June.
Thank you so much, Joshua. Really appreciate hearing from you and your insights.
Bye, Joshua.
So shall we turn things over to Sean, or do you have anything to add, Dan?
I think we are done for the day. I want to thank everyone for joining us on this Sunday, and thank you, Max and Dan, for your enlightening insights. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their Sunday.
Take care, everyone. See you soon. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Lori.
Bye.
Bye-bye.